For many, many years, across the decades, people have relegated mental health to the background, saying that, ye to sabke saath hi hota hai. For a lot of people, mental health is not always the priority. And we don't realize that the prevalence rates are pretty high. Women are expected to be these superheroes, who have these superpowers, who are going to be doing these multiple things at the same time. We feel judged. We feel that people will start looking at us differently. We feel that people around us will just not understand what is happening with us. If we will go and share with them that this is our concern, they would ridicule us, they would laugh at us, there will be sarcasm coming at us. So we try to contain it within our own self. If it's a problem, it's stressing you out, it's troubling you, it's giving you sleepless nights, it's preoccupying your thought process, it's impacting your functioning, please go and talk to someone. It is a problem, regardless of whether it seems like a problem to someone around you or not. Start switching off your phones when you are at home. We feel that the whole world is going to collapse and crash. Agar phone off ho gaya 2 ghante ke liye I'm not available, God knows what catastrophe is going to happen, but nothing really happens.
I can't meet you in the eye when you say this because I'm guilty as charged. It's true. Namaste, Jai Hind. Welcome to another edition of ANI Podcast with Smita Prakash. Today I speak about the issue of mental health. We have an expert. But before I introduce you to her, a little bit of information. There are many studies which have been conducted to determine how many Indians suffer from some form of mental disorders. But those are based on people who actually seek therapy or admit to suffering from the symptoms. It's 2022, but it's still not spoken about. There are many kinds of disorders, psychological disorders which impact on your well-being. There are the common ones like stress, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, OCD, COVID-related or insomnia-related disassociation. Then there are serious disorders like personality disorders, bipolar disorders, schizophrenia and others. There is no age barrier to who suffers from these disorders, young, old, middle-aged, no caste, status, religion, or gender barriers. To understand when to seek help, how to figure out that you might be sliding into some kind of a depression, or your friend, or your spouse, or your parent, or your child, whether they need help, how to figure out that you need professional help, I spoke to a counsellor, Dr. Kamna Chhibber. She heads the Mental Health and Behavioural Sciences Wing at Fortis Healthcare in Gurgaon. Dr. Chhibber is a trained therapist who works with children, adolescents and adults. Joining me in this podcast with Dr. Chhibber is ANI's Health Beat reporter Shalini. Thank you very much for speaking with us, Dr. Chhibber. My first question to you will be that it's 2022 and yet in India, people are still hesitant to seek some kind of a treatment or accept it even that there could be a case of mental disorder in the family. Most of us would tend to think that, oh, ये stress है, इसको तो हम कोप कर लेंगे, चलो चलो पापा से बात कर लो, चलो चलो खेलने चलो and work out, exercise कर लो, इससे ठीक हो जाएगा. Sometimes that's not the case. Right? We tend to think that it's, old age में depression हो जाता है, कोई बात नहीं, ठीक हो जाएंगे. Play with your grandchildren, you'll become okay. This is the advice that older people are given. Sometimes women their mental health issues are completely ignored. That, no, multitasking is something everybody does. So, their issues. So when does one realize that you are sliding into some kind of depression state or mental anxiety state where you need to seek help?
Thank you so much for having me here. It's a real pleasure that, we are speaking about this really important topic about mental health. I think, you've rightly pointed out that for a lot of people, this is not a topic which is given that kind of priority and emphasis. For many, many years, across the decades, people have relegated mental health to the background, saying that, ये तो सबके साथ ही होता है, ये तो stresses हैं, normal जिंदगी के issues हैं, आप किसी ना किसी तरह से cope कर लोगे, अपने आसपास देखो, हम लोगों ने भी तो इतनी जिंदगी देखी है, हमने भी बड़ी situations देखी हैं. So yes, that is the truth, that for a lot of people, mental health is not always the priority. And we don't realize that the prevalence rates are pretty high for mental health related conditions. If you look at the survey which was done in 2015-16, that highlighted very clearly that about 12% of the population has mental health related conditions.
In India?
In India. This is the Indian survey.
And this is when, the 12% would mean that those who have come and sought or those who are admitting it, right?
Yes.
The shadowy secret lot or those who don't even know it, that's not there.
That's not there. And that survey also pointed out that 90% of the people who actually require mental health related services are not being able to access it. Now, what are the reasons that access is not there? Yes, we can turn around and say that experts nahi hai. We have a very large population. We have a huge geographical region that we need to look at. But what that also does is that, as you go into the interiors of the country, a lot of times experts may not be available.
Right.
That is one reason. We do have a paucity of experts. WHO has pointed it out. Our data points it out. But at the same time, like you were very rightly saying, that there are so many myths, misconceptions, and continued stigma which is associated with mental health and mental health related illnesses that people hesitate to seek help. And one of the primary thoughts जो लोगों के दिमाग में आता है वो ये कि मेरे साथ तो हो ही नहीं सकता है. How can I have a mental health related issue? I belong to a good family. I have this support system. I have friends and I am educated. I'm working. I'm earning well. Why would I have anxiety? Why would I have depression? So people also hesitate to accept that mental health related illnesses are illnesses like physical health related conditions. So any individual can have a mental health related issue. Today I may be sitting here as an expert. There is no guarantee to say that tomorrow I could not have a mental health related condition, because there is also a biological aspect which is associated with mental health related illnesses. And we tend to be ignorant of that aspect, which compromises people's ability to then start seeking out help. We feel judged. We feel that people will start looking at us differently. We feel that people around us will just not understand what is happening with us. If we will go and share with them that this is our concern, they would ridicule us, they would laugh at us, there will be sarcasm coming at us. So we try to contain it within our own selves. We curb our instincts also, which may be telling us that this is not how usually I tend to be when I face problems. क्योंकि हमें पता होता है कि problem आई है, what is my typical approach, how much would it affect me? And when you are beginning to recognize that you are struggling to cope with situations, and increasingly you're finding that either your moods are dipping, you're not being able to bounce back from situations, your ability to cope with the situations is getting compromised, it's affecting your sleep, it's affecting your physical health, you're losing interest in things, you're not wanting to meet people, you're struggling to communicate very effectively about what is going on with you. The differences that you're beginning to notice in your approach, they are becoming more and more intense. Even when you're trying to put an effort, you're feeling that kind of fatigue setting in, that I am not being able to shift things. That's the time when you need to start seeking help. You need to go speak to someone to try and understand what is it that is going on with you. You may not have an understanding of what that label could be. डिप्रेशन है, एंजाइटी है, बाइपोलर है, इंसोम्निया हो रहा है, कुछ और हो रहा है, आपको शायद नहीं पता होगा, एंड दैट इज़ नॉट योर जॉब टू फिगर. Just the way you would have approached your GP when you were noticing some symptoms in your body, if you're seeing that, my thinking is changing, the way I'm feeling is changing, the way I'm responding is changing, and it's persisting, it's becoming more different, I'm getting that feedback from the outside, that's the time that you approach someone to understand that could this also mean that there is something which is happening with me which needs to be looked at. And you can approach anyone. You can still go ahead and talk to the same general physician who you approach on a regular day-to-day basis for your other physical health related concerns, because all doctors are trained to understand and know what may be going on in terms of mental health as well, and they will be able to guide you that is this something that you need to look at from a professional standpoint, or is this something which is a regular day-to-day thing, it will pass.
Doctor, when you talk about go talk to someone and you notice a change in you, there are many times that children know that there's something not right. I'm getting angry. I'm getting bullied in school. But when they speak to their parent would think that there's an outside factor.
Right.
बच्चे में कोई there's nothing wrong with the child. My child is strong. You don't want to admit, and especially with boys. I've seen that with girls. they tend to think, "Arey rona band karo," not realizing that that is manifestation of something which is going on, and the child is probably not telling you, but there is something happening. So you tend to think that you can deal with it because you're a good parent. How can you seek help? And then when the school counselor, who's trained to notice these things, points it out, there is a resistance in parents who tend to think, they always are going to point out and say there's something wrong with the parenting. It's not that. My child is fine. They're unnecessarily thinking that. Don't you think that, Shalini, you're a young parent, do you think that many times parents think that this is a judgment on a parent?
Yeah, that's true, ma'am, because they don't want to accept that fact. And, there is something which at that time a child requires some kind of counseling. They should interact with child. They should ask that what exactly is happening, but they avoid to do so.
Do you think that, doctor? I mean, this is a problem that a young parent, my children are grown up, but Shalini has a young child. Right. But I know for a fact, when my children were in school, there was no counselor. And the only counselor who was there was just, if the child was getting too violent and there was a bash up which happened between boys and girls or something like that, they would be told that alag ho jao, jhagda mat karo. That was about it. Right. And in some schools, and in fact in most schools, there is no counselor who can detect these minor things which, by the time the child becomes a preteen, it's already manifested in violence or in behavioral change.
Absolutely. No, you're very right that there is a hesitation which comes in parents to be able to acknowledge first and then accept later on that there is a problem that needs to be addressed and that it could be clinical in nature. Again, it comes back to the same point that in many ways we are ill-equipped to be able to even understand that a mental health related problem could manifest with children. We believe that mental health related illnesses are only things which happen to adults. That is one belief that people have. The second aspect is that we keep on reinforcing the idea that children are always resilient. They bounce back very well. So even when a child is going through a situation where there is some aggression which is coming at them, or they have been bullied within either in the school or in their neighborhood, we believe that they will be able to bounce back. Especially if we have gotten to know about the situation or the incident, we believe that, when we have spoken to our child, we've given them the reassurance, we have gone and fought on behalf of our child, that everything would be settled. And we don't realize that children too tend to think and feel, and as a result also respond in the ways that adults do as well. They are also getting equally impacted by a situation when they are going through it. But we don't necessarily give it that much importance because a child does not have an adequate vocabulary to be able to express very comprehensively what is it that is happening to me inside. So they may not always have emotional words in their repertoire of the vocabulary that they have that which could communicate to an adult around them that they are struggling. And I think the second aspect also is that besides children not having the vocabulary, like I said, our belief is that children will cope. Our belief also is that children don't necessarily understand the complexities. We are not taking into account the fact that our children, especially in today's times, are being exposed to a lot more information than what my generation, your generation, or generations prior to us were exposed to. So their understanding of situations is far more enhanced than what it was for us. We were very naive and I feel that our generations probably did not even understand the complexities of situations, of relationships, the way younger children today do. So I think that's a gap in understanding within adults. And what we do need to do is start educating and start providing information and knowledge to families as well, that children too can have mental health related concerns. It does not mean that the rest of your child's life is ruined. It does not mean that your child is not going to be able to perform or lead a full life. That in fact, if you were to intervene at an early stage, your child is going to overcome whatever it is that the experience is and be able to actually grow towards better strengths in the future if you intervene at an early enough stage. What that means is that parents and schools need to work in collaboration. They need to see each other as a team.
Yeah.
And I think that is something which a lot of times goes missing because it's somewhere become transactional in a way. That we look at it as, okay, my child goes here, I'm paying a certain fee, they need to provide me a service. That's the kind of mechanism which has come into play. So we don't necessarily see that the school the teachers within the school, and the counselor or the principal, the headmistress, they are all aligned to ensuring that children are growing and developing well, that they have the right kind of inputs available, the right kind of scaffolding available. And if they are highlighting something to you, it's not because they want to, segregate your child or make your child feel that they're different, or they're not coming out of some sort of a vengeful space to impact your child's progress. They're actually invested. They're spending a lot of time. The child spends maximum time in school, at least now. During COVID, that had changed for us. But now, children are back to schools. They're spending so much time over there. Teachers are most sensitive to noticing what are the changes that are happening. And if parents would see this as a collaborative process, teachers would also point out things at a much earlier stage.
Yeah.
So if we start changing our approaches and we start building on our information and understanding, I feel that a lot of these situations can be addressed in a much more wholesome manner. Because children do need that support.
Yeah.
These are the things.
Especially after lockdown, they really need some kind of support. What I have also seen that if you talk to the teacher will say it's a kind of negative motivation. What does negative motivation mean? It was very surprising. If you are you are expecting something else from the teacher, and teacher says your child has not done this and that, and if we are saying something to the child, so ma'am, take it as a negative motivation. We can understand negative motivation, but what about a 6-year-old or 5-year-old child? It's like over expectations from the parents also towards teachers, and teachers also towards the parents. So how do you
I'm
deal
going
with
to
the situation,
get to this point and ask the doctor an additional question, especially during COVID times, because the teachers have to finish the courses. So there are many teachers who say कि हमको ये पढ़ाना है भाई, we cannot, like, imagine a class where you have 40, 35, 40, 50 kids. Of course, a teacher notices these discrepancies, but the pressure is on them also, that do they concentrate on these things? So the parent-teacher meeting actually becomes a very draining exercise, because she has to tell the parent about this, and the parent has no patience, because the parent is more concerned about the grades and about syllabus kyun nahi khatam kiya. I'm going to get to that point.
and over expectations and comparison also. This is also the factor. They do a lot of comparisons.
Question of timing and too many kids to each counselor or each teacher. That's a major issue. I'm going to get to that and ask you related question. But Doc, when you were speaking about these things, it just suddenly struck me about this generational shift. Safety and security. Now, my generation, our parents never talked to us about the wrong touch. Right? And we were never told that we were left with uncles and aunts and cousins and people like that. And there are many in my generation who were victim to this wrong touch. Maybe you are seeing more in your generation where parents are talking about this to their children. How important is it for parents to discuss this? Because if it is not discussed, many people say this, चाचा के घर छोड़ रहे हैं, मासी के घर छोड़ रहे हैं. अब उनके घर में your चाचा, मासड़ and all that might be decent people, but there might be a male servant out there. There might be a woman servant out there. When I say servant, of course, it's not pejoratively used, but what I mean is an attendant, house help, anybody out there.
Guest walking in, right? And maybe another older child also experimenting, an older cousin, an older uncle, aunt, somebody experimenting with a younger child, figuring out. How does one talk to this? There is a hesitancy because our parents didn't talk to us. So what is the language? So हम लोग कैसे बात करें? How do you talk to your child, your grandchild about these subjects which have remained taboo in our families? I think this is such an important aspect that I'm so glad we're talking about this right now as well, because we don't even pick it up in a lot of our regular conversations as well. And it's so essential that we need to start talking to children more about what is good touch, what is bad touch, what is attraction, how are relationships formed, what is it that leads to the sense of arousal that you experience when you are in the presence of, either the opposite or the same gender, and that these are things which could happen to you. And an attraction can evolve at a certain stage in your life, and you need to talk about sexuality, about orientation, all of those are topics which now have assumed a lot of importance, because if we as parents, as family members, as adults who are around a certain child will not be speaking about it, we need to understand that children are still getting all of that information. But what will happen is that they will pick it up from sources which may not be the most reliable, which will not be the most credible, in which information may be presented in ways that could either enhance their curiosity or make them start taking or indulging in risky behaviors. And they would get more psychologically impacted because their young minds are not fine tuned or developed enough to be able to process that kind of information. But if you have a parent or an adult who is around you, who is willing to sit down and talk with you, then all of that curiosity, all of those questions are getting addressed at the right stage, at the right time, which is so crucial. And I think right now, the conversations around good touch and bad touch have certainly increased so much because we are so much more attuned to all the situations that are happening around us. Media reports on so many different incidents which have happened with young children, with older children as well, with adults as well. So parents taking that step is so important. And I think schools are also playing a very large role where they have started addressing a lot of these things within the school premises itself. And I think what is more important for a parent to keep in mind is that the conversation that you have to have is not a one-time conversation. I think that's the first important piece that we always need to keep in mind. This is going to be a conversation which you will need to have at multiple times. Those multiple times are going to be based on the age of the child. You start with the young child who's even going to a kindergarten, where you're going to be talking to the child about touch. You will talk to the child about touch in a way that the child can understand. And you will have to keep on refining that conversation till that child is going to get into even the senior grades, where you're not necessarily talking just about touch, but then you're talking about sexuality and orientation. And those conversations are going to come in. And what is going to
I'm going to interrupt you, doctor. I'm so sorry. Where do you get the tools? How does a parent know this? Because हमको तो किसी ने सिखाया नहीं. Our parents were like, "छी मत बात करो," kind of a thing, right?
Right.
So how do you get, nobody teaches these things to us in school that we will need to do this. No doctor tells us, nobody tells us. So how do we get the tools? How do we equip ourselves as parents? And like you were saying that even at kindergarten, all we need told was don't talk to strangers. That's all that we were told.
Yeah.
And where do you get the tools? Like you were saying that this is how you figure out that there is something wrong with you mentally, and you need to figure out that you're slipping into depression or you're seeing triggers. Where do you learn how to be a parent to teach these things?
And ma'am, several times, what happens that, ये गलत है, इसके बारे में बात मत करो, प्लीज़ इस बारे में बात मत करो हैं, और इसको किसी चीज़ को किसी को बताना मत, डिस्कस मत करना किसी से. तो वी शुड एनकरेज आवर चिल्ड्रन, आई बिलीव. बट व्हाट पेरेंट्स डस, आप बताना मत इसको किसी बारे में, और किसी से जिक्र मत करना. उससे क्या होता है, बच्चा एक आइसोलेशन में चला जाता है.
Is that?
It does happen that children a lot of times will start shutting down, especially when the child is told that, अच्छा अभी इसके बारे में नहीं, मतलब, और you start becoming rejecting of the child's emotional
वो तो
experiences.
इतने अच्छे अंकल हैं, उन्होंने तो नहीं किया होगा.
हाँ. So as soon as you will say something like that,
He's
the
never
child
going to
is
come
never
back,
going
or
to come
she's
back.
never going to come back.
The child is never coming back to you. Regardless of what the new situation may be and who that person may be, they will never be able to feel that you would trust them. So while you may be doing a superlative job as a parent in general, this would become the one space that the child may feel that they cannot confide in you. And this would become the one space that would trouble them for a very, very long time to come, and would impact their relationships, their adult experiences, and their expectations that they have from adults around them in general, taking away from their sense of security, their sense of trust, their belief in their own self, because they would always feel that if my parents don't trust me, why would the outside world? So you're compromising their ability to be able to grow up into becoming healthy, adaptive adults in the future. But going back to what your original question was, that, how do you equip yourself with the right tools to be able to have those conversations? I think the first thing that parents need to do is, whoever your pediatrician is, they talk to you about milestones, right? You need to start utilizing that understanding that your pediatrician is giving you about the milestones to start determining that, okay, now is the age or the stage which is coming when my child is growing up, and this is now going to be the time when I'm going to have these conversations. When you know your child is stepping outside for a very young kid, you will have to start talking to them about good touch and bad touch at a much earlier age, and you will have to talk about it in a very gentle way to say that अच्छा जैसे मम्मी पापा आपको हक करते हैं, जैसे मम्मी पापा आपको प्यार करते हैं, कोई और ऐसा करे तो अगर आपको अच्छा नहीं लग रहा है तो आप उसको मना कर सकते हो, और हमको आके बताओ किसने किया, क्या कर रहे थे. So you will have to keep on tweaking that conversation as per the age of the child over a period of time. You may have to make it also gender specific. You may have to say, especially when the child is going to school. So अगर कोई स्कूल में बड़ा बच्चा है जो आपको कहीं पे बुलाता है, अगर आप किसी स्कूल में आप अकेले हो, बोलते हैं कि इस कमरे में आ जाओ, यहाँ पे अकेले बैठ के बात करेंगे, यहाँ पे कोई दीदी हैं, कोई भैया हैं, वहाँ पे कोई आया दीदी हैं, आपने वहाँ पे नहीं जाना है, जहाँ पे कोई आपको अकेले बुलाएगा वहाँ नहीं जाना है. सो यू हैव टू कीप ऑन चेंजिंग दोज कॉन्वर्सेशंस ओवर अ पीरियड ऑफ टाइम. The second thing you need to do is be very aware of what are the conversations happening in school. When school mein there are conversations happening, you need to use that as your cue to say that, okay, I need to now go back and ask my child that what was it like for you. When a conversation has happened in the school about good touch and bad touch, understand from your child, what did they understand? How much did they make sense of it? Do they have any
kids
questions?
don't speak about these matters because they themselves are hesitant. They're processing it themselves. Another thing is, if there are any viewers who are, or listeners who are not parents, please understand that this responsibility also extends to aunts and uncles. If you love your nephew or niece and you're seeing that your sister or brother is not having this conversation with their children, listen into this conversation, what Dr. Chhibber is saying, that talk to them, because that is how you become a good aunt or a good uncle. We've spoken about good parenting, good aunt, good uncle, but parents also face this, like women and men. A major issue I'm seeing is of, in my office, in my newsroom, there are so many young girls. And, mostly in newsrooms, it's populated by young women. And my generation was always told that, oh, you can multitask, you can manage home as well as work. But seems like that led to my generation having a lot of stress and anxiety, and none of us want to admit it. At least my generation, women don't want to admit it, that we took on too much. And that's impacted in so many ways, on us, because we think we can do it all.
Absolutely. And I think, it just kind of highlights that iconic poster right behind you. You just said we can do it all, and the poster says we can do it. And I think
there's a history to this poster,
there's
right?
a big history to that poster. It started out at a time when there was a significant gender gap. It came in at a point in time when women were pushing for equality, for rights, when they were saying that, we too can actually do it. We don't need men to just stand there and tell us that we are supposed to play a certain type of role or occupy a certain position and handle only certain types of chores. We are ourselves pretty strong, and we have the ability to be able to do a lot of different things and balance out different roles. It was at a point in time when we needed that. But what it has done is that it's only ascribed more and more onto the plate of a woman, but it's not gotten balanced out by providing her more and more support to be able to take on the additional things that she's taking on. And somewhere it's become a very skewed situation that we are noticing around us these days. And I think it's not just your generation, my generation, even a lot of the younger ladies that I continue to work with, everyone talks about the fact that how they feel a lot of times unsupported, a lot of times not even able to talk about the fact that they are unsupported, and that they don't have the space to be able to come out and say that I am stressed, because as soon as I say that, it becomes about my gender. कि हाँ तुम तो ये बोल सकती हो, and you will get away with it, and everyone will come around and try and give you more relaxation and leverages so that you can keep growing and doing well, not recognizing that in any case, there isn't an equal way in which things are being done. And I think that somewhere women are expected to be these superheroes, who have these superpowers, who are going to be doing these multiple things at the same time. You go to work, but before you go to work, you need to ensure everything is lined up at home. If you are living with your parents, then for them. If you're with your in-laws, then for them. If you have children, then to take care of them. Making sure that while you're not there, if anyone has any need, no one should be able to turn around and tell you कि तुम नहीं थी तो ये चीज़ हुई नहीं. So you have to anticipate, plan in advance, make sure there are resources available at home, enough staff, enough help to be able to ensure, and that is if you can afford that, to make sure that that is there to cover up for when you're not going to be available your own self.
And keep smiling.
And keep smiling
Have
about
you,
it.
have you noticed, doctor, that we've all been told not to scowl, not to feel or not to give the impression also. Forget about, मतलब अगर अंदर कुछ है तो उसको अंदर दबाए रखो. A man can not look, yeah, you don't, yeah, firstly, he doesn't need to use lipstick, but a woman has to smile through her troubles. A man doesn't need to smile through his troubles. If he looks stressed out or if he looks, if he's scowling, it's like, see, what a hardworking guy. Like a manager I'm talking about. When a manager walks in, he doesn't need to smile. He can look busy all the time. But a woman, even if she's busy, needs to smile, needs to look happy. Because if she doesn't look happy, she has poor manners. She is angry and bad boss, right? And this manifests everywhere. Mind you, even women anchors, they need to look in a particular manner, TV anchors. Men, it doesn't matter what they look like.
True.
The same, I'm sure, is with doctors, right? Like you need to have better manners when you're dealing with patients as compared to your male doctors who can look busy and say, "Parchi likh ke kaat ke de do." But a woman needs to have that nurturing thing all the time, and that puts pressure all the time on you.
It does, but these are also so reflective of the kind of roles and stereotypes that have over the years come and gotten associated with what being a woman is all about. And it's so interesting when you were speaking about the workplaces and how a man could be a certain way and a woman could be a certain way. And the example that was popping up in my head repeatedly was how when a woman snaps in the office, it becomes about maybe she's on her cycle. And when a man will snap, it's like, बॉस ने जो बोला बहुत सही बोला,
उसके बॉस ने प्रेशर डाला होगा,
उसके बॉस ने प्रेशर डाला होगा, बट मतलब उसके साथ कुछ गड़बड़ नहीं है. And so we have these very different ways in which we even perceive emotional responses or ways in which people are communicating because we ascribe it to certain stereotypes that we have been holding on to a very, very long time. And one of the expectations that as a result has come on to women is to present themselves in a certain way, to uphold themselves in a certain way, and to communicate and speak and hold those nurturing roles and be very pleasant and put together at all times, even though you may not be feeling up to it. And yes, there is a movement which has started happening against that in a way where, a lot of women have started stepping in and saying that, if I'm not having a good day, I'm not having a good day. And if you want to judge me, then go ahead, and do that. But I'm not going to be apologetic about this, because what that pressure is doing a lot of times, it's not just stress. This is what is creating a lot of anxiousness. It is what is impacting moods. It is leading to issues like depression. It's causing women a lot of sleepless nights. They are feeling they're working so hard. They may be putting in a lot of effort, but then you're not feeling happy at the end of the day. So what's the purpose of it? And then you begin to question the larger purpose, the larger meaning of what you're doing and the kind of life you're leading. And you're almost feeling that, this is like an endless road, a tunnel which does not seem to have any light at the end of it. And you constantly feel yourself struggling as a result. And that's where mental health related issues tend to blossom.
I'm also going to come on to these COVID related issues, Shalini, because I remember, you were also covering at that time these, young people losing parents, and both parents sometimes to COVID, and parents who had no comorbidities sometimes. So, you always thought that parents will live longer. Like when they were in their 60s, maybe mild diabetes, maybe mild asthma, but they succumbed to COVID. And some of these young people I know, they got no closure because they couldn't even perform the last rites of their parents, or they couldn't even see the body of their parents. They were cremated because they themselves were in hospital. So this is both young men and women. Like, in my introduction, I said that depression doesn't hit any class, any specific class, caste, gender, anybody. So this happened to men, women, everybody that I know too. And there was no closure then. But many of us tend to think, wo to pichle saal hua hai, by now get over it, because But it doesn't end like that, does it? There's no closure to some people's grief.
No, there isn't. And even though in our own diagnostic manuals, we may have gone through phases where we have tried to say, a year is a good enough time period for you to cope with grief, to saying that there can't be a time frame associated with it, to saying that, yes, there should be a time frame. And we've, in our own diagnostic, in our ways of diagnosing that, could this be now an adjustment disorder? Could this now be a depressive illness? Have gone through those processes. But I think when we're looking at COVID, what it has done is it has completely ripped apart whatever resources that people had within themselves and whatever resilience was there to be able to cope with things like loss and grief. Because there was nothing like this which people had ever dealt with. Dealing with a loss which happens very suddenly in itself is very difficult. And dealing with a loss which is happening suddenly and is happening en masse is extremely, extremely traumatic for people. And what we're seeing right now is almost a traumatic kind of a response towards that sense of having lost people, not having been able to have those conversations with them before they went, not having been able to do their last rites in the way that we have all been born and brought up with, knowing that that is also a part of our heritage, our culture. And what that entire process of doing the rituals and all always does for us is that's what allows us to go through that closure process. जब आप वो सारी पूजाएं करते हैं 13 दिन 15 दिन जो भी जिसका
it's a healing
it has its own healing process associated with it.
Sure.
That community grieving together with the family who has lost someone is what allows us to be able to also feel a lot of sense of support. None of that happened. COVID was a period where you could not have multiple people occupying the same space. You could not even have your entire family. How do you cope? How do you feel supported? You feel isolated, alone in your entire experience. And that is what has ensured that somewhere people have not been able to necessarily fully overcome their sense of grief. Yes, right now, where we are at today, with life moving towards that normalcy that we were used to 3 years ago, it's changing the ways in which people are looking at things. It's leading them to be able to let go of some of those experiences. But that sense of loss is not getting filled up.
Yeah,
that
but
void is not going away.
But still they are going through the disaster, If you talk somebody after so long, it's like, Shalini, do you know what has happened during Delta wave? Everybody talk about, it's like, they wanted to talk. It was like a disaster for them.
जैसे आप डेल्टा वेव की बात कर रहे हो, डेल्टा वेव में I mean, I met with people, like for example we were talking about grief, right? Like I know of a bride जिसकी शादी कोविड के टाइम हुई, right? At that time she was like, I'm going to get married regardless, I'm not postponing this because of various reasons. But she never got that lehenga pehna, shadi ka sara tam jham, and she had to compromise. At that time she was ready to do it because she wanted to. They had a certain timeline when they wanted to get married, have babies and pay their EMIs and all those things. You work with a timeline. Lekin wo sab nahi hua, right? You didn't get that, and she can't even talk about it because this is a rich person problem. Right? लोग देखो तो people lost their loved ones और तुम हो कि रो रही हो कि तुम्हारा शादी अच्छी से नहीं हुई, so this rich people problem, many people don't seek help to go to a counselor, psychologist, psychiatrist. Firstly, nobody knows किसके पास जाएं पहले. You were saying when it's a children issue, go to your pediatrician or your general practitioner who will tell you that yes, you're sliding in. अब किसके पास जाएं, and is it a rich person problem?
I think it's very unfortunate that we end up classifying things in our own mind. This is a rich person's problem. This is not a problem which should be looked at. If it's a problem, it's stressing you out. It's troubling you. It's giving you sleepless nights. It's preoccupying your thought process. It's impacting your functioning. Please go and talk to someone. It is a problem, regardless of, whether it seems like a problem to someone around you or not. It's a problem for you. We have to learn to start prioritizing our own selves and our own mental health. It's compromising your well-being. It's a large enough issue then, right? Don't judge your own self, because that's where the judgment process is starting. We're judging our own selves. We're giving the right to everyone around us also to judge us, because they can see through the discomfort that you're having, and being able to even talk about the fact that you're troubled by something which could be considered not that big or grave a situation. And if you feel that the people around you are not being able to understand or respond to you in the way that you require for them to, then reaching out to an expert is extremely important. And you're very right in saying that, people a lot of times will not know who to reach out to. The reason they don't know is because they don't know what the differences are between the different experts who are available. I would still say that, even if you're an adult, you can always talk to a GP if you don't know, your internal medicine doctor, if you don't know who you could be speaking with. But otherwise, if you feel that it's a situation which, if there are situations in your life which are troubling you, which you are not being able to let go of or reach some sort of an understanding or solution of, talking to a psychologist could be helpful. Now, psychologists are of different types. You've got people who've done their masters, who are counselors or psychologists in general, who we call them, and they are typically trained to work with concerns which may be, say, health related, relationships related. When you're looking at more clinical related issues, that's where clinical psychologists come in. And in India, the qualifying degree for them would be at least an MPhil in psychology. And some of them may have also done further their doctoral studies around it as well. And so you then reach to a clinical psychologist. Now, you may not be able to figure out who may be the right person still. Go to any one of them. Okay. A psychiatrist would work with the clinical problems, but they would utilize medications to treat those problems. So if you have a depressive illness, you have a bipolar disorder, you have a schizoaffective or a schizophrenia or an anxiety disorder, when you've reached a diagnosis, a lot of these may require a medical intervention, because like I mentioned, that mental health related illnesses have a strong biological component which can only be addressed with medications. Okay. That the psychiatrist will do. The therapists or the psychologists, the clinical psychologists, they will all be working in parallel, usually with the psychiatrist on the same problems, but doing the talk therapy.
See, Doc, I've noticed that you can take a child to a therapist. Now, a major issue, see, with modern medication, people are living longer. So you have a huge problem on our hands with parents, grandparents living long, which is very nice, but there are aging related issues because of one, again, COVID related, because they were living apart. Suddenly that link was broken. You couldn't visit your parents, you couldn't visit your grandparents. They were isolated, living for almost a year, living on their own. Right? They couldn't meet with their children, they couldn't meet with their grandchildren during that. And then there were issues like, older people used to go for satsang ke liye chale gaye. Or they had those support structures where they would go to the neighborhood, place where they would do their yoga. Well, group therapies, which we used to. They were great stress busters. Wo sara band ho gaya. Right? Now, depression sets in, but when they had no issues till they were 70, 75, suddenly when they are, 75, 80, they have mild dementia related issues. They have this anger related issues because they feel they were neglected. Right. They know that they were neglected for a certain reason which couldn't be so resolved. But these are manifesting. But because of their age, you can't take them to the doctor. They will not go. They will not admit it firstly that they need some help. And young professionals don't have the time.
Absolutely.
So kya karo?
Well, the solution, of course, lies in being able to sit down and have conversations. Because अगर आप situation को address नहीं करोगे तो कोई चीज़ बेहतर नहीं होने वाली है.
Right.
And if there is a clinical problem, then it needs to be addressed clinically. I understand that the elderly a lot of times are resistant to engaging in the conversations. I've seen it with my own grandparents. So, I work in this space, and despite that, the challenge was there. And but then if it is a medical issue which is emerged, then it needs to be dealt with through the psychiatrist. And if there is a clear-cut depression or a clear-cut anxiety or some other illness, an insomnia which is there, dementia-like changes which are happening, then the consults need to start happening with the doctors at least. But the second aspect is that you need to start talking to your parents. Sit down, have that difficult conversation. They will be resistant. They will not want to engage in that interaction. There may be a lot of cognitive errors, like we say. A problem may be getting magnified in their mind. They may have developed a tunnel vision on an issue. They may not be willing to look at the different aspects of the situation. While those errors may be there in the way they're thinking or looking at a situation, it's only if you're going to sit down and have that conversation with them, not once, but be willing to engage a few times. I do feel that that barrier of resistance does break. At the end of the day, for them, meaning and purpose comes through their family. Seeing their children, engaging with their grandchildren, the more they're able to do that, the more they feel much more happier, a lot more relaxed. They do need to have their routines, and a push will be required to kind of encourage them to say that, आप restart करो. जो भी थोड़ा बहुत आप कर सकते हो करना शुरू करो. For them, the hesitation also happens कि अब मैंने 2 साल से तो कुछ किया नहीं है, हो सकता है मैं कर ही नहीं पाऊँ. So the confidence also goes down because you haven't stepped out. You're not sure, will I be able to do that walk for a kilometer that I used to do previously? So the solution is to tell them that आप 100 meters कर लो. आप जितना कर सकते हो आप करो. But yes, as the younger person around them, you will have to engage and invest because they have also engaged and invested in us at a time when they did not have the time.
True. That's true. That's so true. To have the patience. And I know that I used to get irritated that आपको बताया तो था that I'll come at 8 p.m. Why do you keep asking what time will you come? Or, you've come at 9. Didn't you say you'd come tomorrow? Those kind of things. But then I realize as I'm aging that I make the same mistakes. I didn't have the patience then. I just hope my children have the patience with me. Do you feel that too, Shalini? Do you see yourself becoming the parent that used to irritate you when you were young?
Yeah, that's true, ma'am. But most of the time, whenever I see, a parent, old age parents, so it's like, I always talk them a lot. Do a lot of sharing, a lot of caring. It's like, they wanted to talk, they want company at that point of stage. So it's like, they want that हम उनसे ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा बात करें, वो कुछ बोलना चाह रहे हैं हम समझे, because we sometimes we also take them granted, like
also they come under older people. This is one thing I wanted to talk to you about also. Older people falling for scams, right? Because what has happened is that everybody has a cell phone. There was no need at some point of time to teach your parent how to use Google and how to use internet, how to do Instagram. ये सब सिखाने की ज़रूरत नहीं होती थी. But now what has happened is somebody gives a call and says, give your OTP, they give the OTP.
Yeah, this is happening.
So you don't, how to tell your children to watch out for scams on and to the safety part of using the cell phone, because everybody gave their kids cell phone for safety reasons at some point of time, and then they gave them devices during COVID. But then there's no safety, so they could be watching, and your 8-year-old kid could be watching porn, and your 70-year-old parent can be giving the OTP on the phone. How do you tell this? Do you need an outsider to teach this to your kids, and do you need an outsider to tell your parents?
I wish we could have outsiders doing so much more.
What I mean when an outsider, I mean is, do you need to tell your therapist that please tell my parent or please tell my kid?
No, you don't need that at all. I think what you do need is becoming more aware. I think that we're so stuck in our day-to-day routines. A lot of times we're not switching off from our work or from the tasks that we feel we need to do, that it takes away from our awareness of what may be going on with other people who are there within the home. So you are there, you're physically present, but a lot of times you're not necessarily psychologically engaged to their experiences. That's where the gap starts happening. That's where you start missing out on the cues that I need to provide a certain information, or I need to provide a certain scaffolding or a sense, or create some sort of a security mechanism to be able to protect both the young people as well as the elderly who are either living with me or may not be living with me as well. And it's only going to be if you are fully there in the moments that you are spending and you're not preoccupied with other things, that you will be able to start noticing these things. And that's the first change that I think people need to start doing. And what do you need to do for that? Start switching off your phones when you are at home. we feel that the whole world is going to collapse and crash. You know, agar phone off ho gaya 2 ghante ke liye, I'm not available, God knows what catastrophe is going to happen, but nothing really happens.
I can't meet you in the eye when you say this because I'm guilty as charged. It's true. You know, I have seen even in restaurants people sitting and not looking. And I used to see this abroad. I never used to see this in India. But in India, yes, now. It's there everywhere, and it's not just in urban India, it's a rural phenomenon too.
It is. It very much is, because the phones, the media, the social media, everything is infiltrated and penetrated our lives to such an extent that we feel incapacitated if we did not have these around us. We have lost our ability to have fun and to be able to spend time with our own selves. We've lost our ability to be able to spend time doing activities which do not involve social media. Right? We are only looking at gadgets a lot of the times. In fact, a lot of times if I ask young people, I ask that, you know, okay, what are the hobbies that you currently have? Most of them are completely at a loss, because what their hobbies are either playing on their PlayStations and Xboxes, or they're on their phones, on their Instagrams, or their Twitters and Facebooks, whatever, and newer social media platforms which have come up. And they're not necessarily engaging with the real world. People in the real world, the same people that they are texting with, they would hesitate to be able to have an in-person conversation. Now, what are we doing? We're taking away our own skill sets. We are losing our abilities to be able to build those relationships.
Conversations.
We can't have those conversations. We feel ill-equipped in group settings.
Yes. And
That's
it's
true.
not just children. I'm noticing this in older generation people also, where and especially after COVID, you know, getting together 4 to 6 people in a room don't have patience anymore to have conversations. After a while, it gets, the noise of 4 people talking in a room gets to you. You want to go back home. You don't want to talk because it's become too much.
Doctor, I just wanted to know this. What is the role of social media? If I talk about Instagram also, Twitter also. On Twitter also, what we see that, you know, the kind of tweet you have done, it's like, you know, अरे मैंने थोड़ा कम hits आए, कम likes आए हैं. And if we talk about Instagram also, it's like, you know, they filter their photos, and जब आप असली में उनको देखो तो they are completely different. So how it is affecting a kind of anxiety, or what exactly it is?
No. It's not they are looking, Shalini. I think what is happening is that the person themselves, right? Suppose I've used a filter. Uske baad, when I look at the mirror, so it's not what other people are saying, what you yourself are feeling. Because when you look at the mirror, you're not as
You look
thin.
different. Yeah.
You're not as thin.
Yeah.
You're not as, your complexion is not fair because people lighten their skin. So it's not what other people are saying so much. I think it's what you yourself are saying as well. Yeah.
How it affects basically.
So I think there's
self-worth में problem होती है ना, because people are actually making themselves look taller. I can understand, you know, you want to look thinner or more voluminous in some respect, but making yourself taller, that's never going to happen.
But this is happening now. So how it is going to affect? What kind of anxiety it gives?
So I think there are 2-3 aspects that we need to understand. That there is a lot of pressure that people are feeling that they need to conform to a certain type of image, a certain type of sometimes body image, a certain type of way in which they're being perceived on the outside by the rest of the world.
Okay, that's what you were trying to say. Okay.
And when the perceptions are being directed in your own mind on account of what is the kind of response that you're getting from people, you start wanting to change it. Now, what that does is that you're bringing about a discrepancy between what is your real self, what is the virtual self. That entire gap which is beginning to emerge between the real and the virtual self is going to lead to a lot of depletion in your own ability to feel good about who you are. You feel unsure about your own self. It leads to a lot of doubts about am I really this good enough? What would happen if I were to step into the real world and when people actually see me for who I am? So you start thinking that I am not going to be accepted by people on the outside. So it's going to lead to a lot of avoidance of social situations, of not wanting to present yourself for just who you are. It leads to people to then start thinking about doing procedures for their own selves, cosmetic surgeries, because they feel that that is going to be the better way to look, that is the more acceptable way. And if you've ended up having some sort of greater recognition on account of these changed ways in which you're presenting yourself on these online platforms, you feel that yes, that is what is actually more acceptable. And it's leading to a false belief system where you are becoming rejecting of your own self, impacts your sense of self, your worthiness, your esteem, can make you feel extremely anxious, can actually impact your moods, make you feel low, lead to things like depression. A lot of people become extremely preoccupied with the thought processes. They may find themselves constantly thinking about things, what is going to be my next post? How do I ensure I keep looking like this? What am I going to do when I'm going to step out? How do I make sure that, I'm not judged? And that's the preoccupation which sets in. So your entire thought process, you start seeing is shifting. It will impact your functionality. It will affect the ways in which you're engaging with people, your relationships, your work, everything. So the deleterious impact that something like this can have is so large, and which is why with a lot of young people, when we work with them, two of the things that we talk about, one is about media literacy, which is that you need to start raising questions about the media content that is coming at you and start understanding what is the source of the information, what could be the purpose behind it, what could there be a different way of looking at the same thing, what are the values that are being put forward by that media message. But simultaneously, we're also talking to them about their sense of self, their self-concepts, and how do you need to strengthen those, and how do you start learning to lean into who you are as a person, build acceptance for who you are, recognize.
True. Like, especially like now, these online dating sites and all.
Yeah,
because the left swipe, right swipe business which is going on, many people, young men and women, think that they have to conform to those stereotypes. They take medication, they take supplements because they need to look in a particular manner. I was speaking to a gym trainer who said that he knows of a couple of incidents which have happened where, they fixed trainer के साथ इस वक्त exercise करना है. Previous night they may have had a late night, but then they are not, because they've paid the trainer already or they've paid the gym, they need to reach the gym and they need to exercise. So on 3 hours of sleep, they come to the exercise, they come to exercise. Now, to do that, they take a Red Bull or they take, something to keep them awake to exercise. And then those heart attacks, those things are happening in the gym. These are real problems which used to happen to celebrities earlier. It's happening to ordinary middle class homes where young people, just because of these online, because most of the dating is happening online. Do you see that as a real problem which is happening now?
A lot of the dating is happening online, but what's also happening is that there is so much access to information about how you can do these things that people are indiscriminately relying on it, not recognizing that everything that is done, there is a logic behind it. There would be some sort of a scientific thought process that needs to be associated with any sort of a practice. So if you are going to be taking a Red Bull and you've just had 3 hours of sleep, what is it really doing to your body? You're not even raising that question inside you. Whereas when someone may be working, a doctor is working with a celebrity, or, a physical health practitioner is working with a celebrity, and they would be utilizing certain mechanisms, they would have a full thought process around it. But you're not aware of that thought process. You just pick the behavior and you're randomly implementing it on yourself, being experimental, and then which is leading to deleterious consequences, and which is where media literacy comes in. You need to start understanding the thought process behind what is being done, why is it being done, stop following people blindly, reduce the comparisons, start building your own self. There is goodness in every individual. There is a positive in every individual. Everyone has strengths. There will always be areas of development or improvement that we will all have throughout our life. But that doesn't take away from who you are. And you need to be able to lean into that. And I do believe very strongly that people need to start building interests outside of the virtual world. We have to engage with life. We need to start doing a conscious digital detox so that we can expose ourselves in a very conscious manner to other things. There's a lot which is there out there to experience.
I'm going to have you coming back to the studio to discuss with me about social media. I think that's a whole different realm,
important.
And how all of us need to learn the tools to cope with, the negativity that comes in from overexposure to social media. Of course, it has its good points.
Of course.
And, but how we can cope with this new realm that we are
Yeah.
all entering, and especially we haven't even gone into the rural areas and the problems that it's having, because they're not trained. At least some of us are equipped with a certain education where we are, we know how to handle it. So I'm going to have to come back. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure being here with you.
Thank you for listening in to ANI Podcast with Smita Prakash. Please like or subscribe in whichever platform you have listened to this. Namaste. Jai Hind.